This weekend, the latest film in the Omen franchise, The First Omen, dropped in theaters. I saw it yesterday. Here are my thoughts on it. Hi, my name is Nathan, and I talk about a bunch of movies on this channel. If you're new here, tell me below in the comment section, share what you thought of The First Omen over on my channel. I have more content like this. Check those out once this video is over. And if you enjoyed this video, click the like button and be sure to subscribe because that really does help a lot. And let me know what you think of the Omen franchise in general. As for me, I watched the original Omen for the first time back in like January or February, but I just paused there, and for the past week, 2 weeks or so, I watched through the entire series, and so I'm pretty new to this franchise as I just watched through all the films. So that is my perspective of the franchise. With that said, let's just get started talking about the good. And as for me, going into this movie, I went in a little bit cynical, and I'm just like, oh, eye rolling, why are we doing this? When I first found out that this film even existed, I was a bit surprised. Like, I was never particularly asking for a prequel to The Omen about the birth of Damien. Even having seen the rest of the franchise, I was never asking for a film about the birth of Damien. But as it turns out, the film was a nice little pleasant surprise, and it actually ended up being a pretty decent prequel to The Omen. Typically, when prequels come out, I'm not as interested as I am for sequels, but sometimes they could surprise me, this movie being one of them. Like, for example, I would say last year, Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I had never seen a Hunger Games movie until like that past month. Watched through all of them, and I wasn't really sure how to make of them doing a Snow prequel. And Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes ended up being my favorite of the Hunger Games franchise. And I still stand by that. That one is my favorite. This one I wouldn't go, is not as good as Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, but I did find it a pleasant surprise. And what makes it a nice, decent prequel to The Omen is that it doesn't spend its time answering questions that the audience was never wondering. It makes it just interesting enough that it is basically kind of a mystery thriller, a self-contained mystery thriller, more so than an actual full-on prequel to The Omen. It works as just a nice little mystery horror thriller film. And with a thriller or horror film like this, that just makes for a story that is established in the first act, and then it's all kind of comes together in the second act, and the final twists and turns pay off in the third act. And this movie, I think, does that pretty well with the story, the way things are playing out, who's good, who's bad, who is doing malicious intentions. This one is basically about the birth of Damien and this conspiracy by these nuns in an orphanage who are setting about to bring about the birth of the Antichrist. Which, when I say that out loud, it kind of sounds a little bit ridiculous. But the movie, because of the place it's set in Rome and the time where it's set and certain things going on in the background of the film, it kind of makes sense and comes together in the third act when you do get those reveals. And for me, what makes this one stand out a little bit from the franchise is that it's able to be very unsettling, and it's probably the most violent and gory of the entire franchise. You get all these unsettling sequences, especially these birth sequences in the entire film, that they just kind of get under your skin. They're memorable. And this is probably the goriest film in the entire Omen franchise. There's actual blood. There is kind of a body count coming from this film. We'll get into more of the kills later on in the video, but just a film that, it was a nice little pleasant surprise. I'm glad I experienced it. And as somebody that went in pretty cynical going into this, I was actually quite surprised with the final product. And so it was a nice mystery thriller. It did a good job of having just enough scares, thrills, twists and turns, and it had a bunch of violence, and all that is awesome. But it's not a perfect movie, so let's move on to the bad. And what comes to mind when talking about this movie is that it is an Omen film. It is a prequel to the Omen. It is set in the same continuity franchise as the original Omen and the two films that follow. But, for me, it doesn't really feel like an Omen film. And sometimes I can appreciate when prequels or sequels to franchises try doing something different with the material. But here, I didn't think this one clearly fits into the Omen franchise. And I think a big part of that is because it is 2024 now, and they did try amplifying the experience by adding more modern technology, adding more violence. And while I appreciate that it's more violent, it tries to be more unsettling, all the music that kicks in during certain sequences, it feels a lot more modern. But the 1976 Omen is a little bit more creepier than this film is. And I don't know, some of that is just the ideas the 1976 one captures, the certain aesthetic of that film. And here, everything they try to do to amplify the Omen experience kind of makes it feel a little bit more generic than it actually is. It kind of has the same sort of tone as a bunch of recent horror movies that I've seen. And that makes it just feel a little bit generic. Now, the story, I think, works as a whole. It works as a prequel to The Omen. But the tone made it feel a little bit more kind of meh than it probably should have. And I think some of that is because it is modern day. Also, I think the pacing could have been a lot better, especially in the first 30 minutes. I thought the setup took much longer, and for the plot to kick in, it doesn't kick in quite as soon as you would expect it to. Now, once it gets going, it really does start to get going. It becomes more interesting. But the beginning of the film, the first 30 minutes, nothing strange enough really happens. It's just the certain events of sequences following this character. But for me, overall, just a pleasant surprise. I was surprised on how much that I actually enjoyed this film, especially considering the fact that I went in kind of cynical, and I was never asking for a prequel to The Omen. It's a pretty decent film in general. So overall, I'll just give it a B. But those are just my thoughts on the film. Down below in the comment section, share what you thought of the First Omen over on my channel. I have more content like this. Check those out right now. Thank you guys so much for sticking around to the end, and I will see you in the next one.